It began with a funeral that felt more like a warning. On July 4th, 2025, the Bishop Briggs crematorium overflowed with mourners, hardened faces from Glasgow's underworld, standing shoulder to shoulder in tense silence. They weren't just burying Ross Monaghan and Eddie Lyons Jr. They were burying any illusion that peace had ever existed between the Lyons and Daniel clans. Two men executed on the sun-soaked streets of Spain. One message whispered through the crowd: this war isn't over. But what keeps it alive after 24 years? On the evening of May 31st, 2025, an masked gunman walked into an Irish bar in Fuengirola, Spain. It was Champions League final night. The place was packed. He raised his weapon toward Eddie Lyons Jr., a 52-year-old Scotsman nursing a drink at the bar. The gun jammed. For 3 agonizing seconds, the only sound was the metallic click of a failed mechanism. Lyons turned. Their eyes met. The gunman cleared the chamber and fired. Lyons dropped instantly. Then the shooter turned and sprinted after Ross Monaghan, the bar's owner, who was already running for his life through the kitchen. He didn't make it. Both men were dead before the police arrived. When Spanish investigators traced the suspect's movements, they discovered something chilling. The killer had an escape route mapped to Portugal. His phone pinged towers in Scotland days before, and the weapon, sourced through channels linked to a crime family 2,000 miles north in Glasgow. This wasn't a random hit. This was the latest chapter in a war that had been raging for 24 years. A war that began with £20,000 worth of cocaine and a moment of youthful arrogance that would leave dozens dead. To understand why 2 middle-aged men died in a Spanish resort town in 2025, you have to go back to Glasgow, back to 2001, back to a cramped safe house in Milton, one of the city's roughest neighborhoods, where the Daniel family stored their product. Jamie Daniel had built an empire on heroin in the 80s and 90s, then pivoted to cocaine as the market shifted. He was methodical, calculating, respected. But respect in Glasgow's underworld isn't given. It's maintained through fear. And in the summer of 2001, a group of teenagers decided they weren't afraid. They called themselves the Club Boys. Among them were Ross Monaghan and Eddie Lyons Jr., both in their late teens, both hungry for reputation. They knew about the safe house. They knew the Daniels kept weight there. So they broke in, took £20,000 worth of cocaine and sold it on the street. They didn't pay the Daniels a penny. It was, by any measure, a colossal miscalculation. Because in the criminal underworld, theft isn't just about money. It's about power. It's about what happens when word gets out that you got robbed by kids and did nothing. Jamie Daniel demanded repayment. The Lyons family refused. And just like that, a £20,000 debt became a blood feud. What no one could have predicted was how deep it would go, how personal it would become, or how many lives it would consume over the next 2 decades. The Daniels needed to send a message, so they turned to their enforcer, a young man in his 20s with protruding front teeth and a nickname that didn't match his brutality, Kevin Carroll, known as Gerbil on the streets. Carroll had a personal stake in this. Allegedly, he'd been bullied by members of the Lyons crew when they were younger. Now, he had the power to settle old scores, and he did. Carroll's tactics were medieval: kidnappings, beatings, psychological warfare designed not just to hurt, but to humiliate. For 5 years, both sides traded blows, drive-bys, ambushes, close calls. The city's underworld watched nervously. This wasn't business anymore. This was existential. But what happened next would shock even the police.
On a cold November night in 2006, Kevin Carroll and a group of associates drove to Lynn Cemetery in Glasgow. They parked near the grave of Gary Lyons, the 8-year-old brother of Eddie Lyons Jr., who had died of leukemia in 1991. They attached a tow rope to the headstone, and they ripped it from the ground with a 4x4. The grave was left desecrated, destroyed. The message was clear. Nothing was sacred, not even the memory of a child. In the brutal logic of gang warfare, there are still lines you don't cross. Attacking a dead child's grave is one of them. The Lyons family was devastated. and raged, and suddenly there was no possibility of peace. Because how do you negotiate with someone who would do that? How do you let that go? You don't. 3 weeks later, on December 6, 2006, two masked gunmen walked into Apple Motors, a garage in Lamb Hill where several Lyons family members were working. They opened fire. Michael Lyons, 21 years old and a cousin of Eddie Jr., was killed instantly. Stephen Lyons, Eddie's older brother, took multiple rounds but survived. Another man, Robert Pickett, was critically wounded. The shooters were Raymond Anderson and James McDonald. Both were caught. Both were convicted. And in 2008, they received life sentences with 35-year minimum terms, the longest in Scottish history at that time. But the convictions didn't end the war. They escalated it, because now there were bodies on both sides, and in this world, bodies create debts. Debts that must be paid.
For 3 years, the feud simmered. Both families regrouped. The Daniels tightened security, the Lyons prepared. And on January 13, 2010, in the parking lot of an Asda supermarket in Rober Royston, Kevin Carroll paid the ultimate price. He was ambushed in broad daylight, shot more than 10 times. Families with shopping carts scattered as the sound of gunfire echoed across the lot. Carroll died where he fell. The execution was precise, military grade, and it sent a clear message. The Lyons had not forgotten the grave, they had not forgotten Michael, and they would not stop. Ross Monahan was arrested and tried for the murder in 2012. He was acquitted. The evidence was circumstantial. Witnesses were too terrified to talk. But another man, William Patterson, a known hitman for the club boys, had fled to Spain. He was extradited in 2015, convicted and sentenced to life with a 22-year minimum. Justice, in a sense, had been served. But the war was far from over. Between 2010 and 2016, the feud appeared to cool. Police crackdowns had decimated both organizations. Jamie Daniel was aging and ill. Eddie Lyons Sr. faced charges for financial crimes. Open violence declined, but beneath the surface, nothing had changed. The grievances were still there. The hatred was still there. And when the old guard began to fall, the new generation would prove even more ruthless. Jamie Daniel died in July 2016 at the age of 58. Cancer took him, but his death left something far more dangerous: a power vacuum. For years, Jamie had kept the conflict contained. He was strategic, methodical. He understood that all-out war was bad for business. But with him gone, restraint disappeared. And into that vacuum stepped a man who had every reason to want revenge. Stephen Lyons, Eddie Jr.'s older brother, the man who had survived the Apple Motors massacre with bullets still lodged in his body. He had fled to Spain years earlier, then moved to Dubai, where he operated in luxury and safety. From there, he coordinated a campaign of terror that would push Glasgow to the brink. Between late 2016 and 2017, there were 5 attempted murders in 5 months. The attacks were brazen, calculated, and designed to send a message. On May 18, 2017, Stephen Daniel, Jamie's nephew, was leaving a Rangers football match when he realized he was being followed. The attackers had placed a GPS tracker on his car. They chased him at over 100 miles per hour through Glasgow's streets. They rammed him off the road, and when his car came to a stop, they dragged him out and attacked him with a machete. His nose was nearly severed. His face was permanently disfigured. He survived, but barely. The attack wasn't just about killing. It was about dominance, about making the Daniels afraid to exist. There were drive-by shootings, sword attacks on bystanders. A man named Ryan Fitzsimmons was slashed simply for being in the wrong place. Homes were firebombed. Businesses were torched. The city was watching its underworld spiral into chaos, and the police were watching too. In 2018, authorities launched a massive operation. They arrested 6 Lyons associates, including Robert Pickett, the man who had survived the 2006 massacre. The trial took place in May 2019. All 6 were convicted of conspiracy to murder. Combined, they received 104 years in prison. The judge was blunt. "You sought to turn Glasgow into a war zone," he said. "There is no place for jungle law in this city." It was a significant victory for law enforcement. But it didn't end the feud, because the war had already evolved. It had gone global, and a new player was about to enter the game. His name was Ross McGill, born in Glasgow, raised in violence. At 31, he was living in Dubai, running a crew called Tamagunto, which means we are together in Spanish. He was nicknamed Miami for his flashy lifestyle, luxury cars, designer clothes, yachts. He styled himself as Mr. Big. But beneath the glamour, McGill was a businessman, and in 2021, he had a problem. He'd been scammed in a cocaine deal. The buyer was linked to Mark Richardson, a major drug boss in Edinburgh, who had ties to the Daniel family. Richardson was in prison, but his network was still active. McGill wanted revenge. More importantly, he wanted market share. So he reached out to the Lyons family with a proposition. "Team up with me," he said. "We'll destroy the Richardson-Daniel network together, and we'll split the spoils." The Lyons agreed, and with that handshake, the feud entered its most violent phase yet.
Between 2022 and 2025, central Scotland became a war zone. McGill and the Lyons didn't just attack rivals, they terrorized them. Homes were firebombed while families slept. Drive-by shootings were filmed and posted to social media with music and taunting captions. It was psychological warfare in the digital age. They weren't just trying to kill their enemies, they were trying to humiliate them, break them, make them too afraid to fight back. The Daniels retaliated. In May 2024, they firebombed the taxi belonging to the father of McGill's girlfriend. In early 2024, they opened fire on homes in Edinburgh. Children were inside. In April 2025, they coordinated 4 firebombings in a single night. One house had a child asleep upstairs. The police were overwhelmed. They formed a task force of over 100 officers, but as the Scottish Police Federation admitted, they were chronically underfunded. The gangs had more money, better weapons, and fewer rules. Still, they pushed forward. Operation Portal Edge resulted in 55 arrests, firearms, arson, organized crime. But even as suspects were led away in handcuffs, everyone knew the truth. The feud would continue, because it always did. And then there was the international dimension, because this wasn't just a Scottish story anymore. The Lyons family had spent years in Spain's Costa del Sol, living among expats and criminals who had fled the UK. While there, they formed an alliance with one of Europe's most dangerous cartels, the Kinahan Cartel. Led by Daniel Kinahan, an Irishman with global reach, the Kinahans controlled cocaine routes from South America to Europe. Together, the Lyons and the Kinahans became known as the Celtic Cartel. Stephen Lyons was the key liaison, and in 2023, that partnership bore fruit. Off the coast of Ireland, authorities seized the MV Matthew, a vessel carrying £157 million worth of cocaine. Investigators believe the Lyons helped orchestrate the shipment. The feud was no longer just about Glasgow. It was about international drug trafficking, European cartels, transnational organized crime, and that made it infinitely more dangerous. Which brings us back to Fungirola, back to that Irish bar on Champions League final night, back to Eddie Lyons Jr. and Ross Monaghan. Both men had been part of this war from the beginning. They'd stolen the cocaine in 2001. They'd survived 2 decades of retaliation. They'd built lives in Spain, thinking distance would keep them safe. It didn't. The gunman who killed them was arrested in Liverpool days later. His phone records showed contact with Scotland. Spanish investigators told their Scottish counterparts that the suspect was a professional, a hitman linked to the Daniel family. Police Scotland publicly denied that the murders were orchestrated from the UK, but experts weren't convinced. The escape route, the timing, the weapon sourcing, it was too sophisticated to be coincidence. And if the Daniels were responsible, there was another terrifying possibility – retaliation. Because Eddie Lyons Jr. and Ross Monaghan weren't just members of the Lyons family. They were connected to the Kinahan Cartel, and the Kinahans don't forgive. On July 4, 2025, Scotland came to a standstill. At Bishop Briggs Crematorium in East Dunbartonshire, 2 funerals were held. Eddie Lyons Jr., Ross Monaghan, side by side. Dozens of mourners gathered under the watchful eyes of police. Officers filmed every face, recorded every license plate, because they knew that in this world, funerals aren't just about grief. They're about strategy, about seeing who shows up, who's still in the game. The ceremony was somber, emotional, but beneath the surface, everyone understood what it meant. This war wasn't over. It was just entering a new chapter. And it's not just the headline murders that keep this conflict alive. It's the constant, grinding violence. The 16-year-old and 20-year-old arrested in April 2025 for 5 counts of attempted murder. The failed 500,000-pound drug deal that sparked retaliatory arson attacks. The firebombings that never make the national news but destroy lives just the same. This is a war sustained by low-level terror, by a generation raised in violence who know nothing else. And as long as that cycle continues, there will be no peace. Because vengeance doesn't have an expiration date. Reputation can't be rebuilt through compromise. And in the world these men inhabit, backing down is the same as dying. 24 years, dozens dead, hundreds arrested, millions spent on policing. And it all started with 20,000 pounds worth of stolen cocaine and a refusal to say sorry. Today, the Daniel family is weakened but not destroyed. The Lyons family is scattered across Europe and the Middle East, operating from Dubai and Spain. Ross Miami McGill is still free, still dangerous, still plotting his next move. And in the streets of Glasgow, Edinburgh, and beyond, young men with no memory of 2001 are picking up guns and carrying forward a war they didn't start but feel obligated to finish. The question isn't whether the violence will continue. It's how many more will die before someone, somewhere, decides that enough is enough. But as the mourners filed out of that crematorium on a warm July afternoon, one thing was painfully clear. That day hasn't come yet, and until it does, the bodies will keep falling. Because this is a war without end, a blood debt that can never be repaid, and a reminder that in the underworld, some grudges are eternal. And with cartel alliances deepening and power still up for grabs, one haunting truth remains. This story isn't finished. So the question is, who will survive the next chapter? If you want to see how global cartels, old-school enforcers, and new-age gangsters collide in Britain's hidden criminal empires, subscribe to Inside the Secret World of Mafia Titans, hit the bell, and join us for the next deep dive into the world few dare to expose.
Picture this. It's 11:30 on a Saturday night in sunny Spain. Soccer fans are leaving a popular bar after watching the Champions League final. The atmosphere should be celebratory. But in the shadows, a black-clad figure emerges from a waiting car. 2 shots ring out. 2 men fall dead on the pavement. The gunman vanishes into the night, leaving behind a trail of blood that stretches not just across southern Spain, but all the way back to the grimy streets of Glasgow, Scotland. What you're about to discover is how a 25-year-old feud between 2 Scottish crime families has transformed from local turf wars into an international nightmare. A story of stolen drugs, acid attacks, machete violence, and murders that span continents. This is the story of Scotland's most dangerous gang war, and how it went global. Our story begins not in the sun-soaked streets of Spain's Costa del Crime, but in the concrete jungle of Glasgow, Scotland, a city that spent decades trying to shed its violent reputation, transforming itself into a celebrated city of culture. But beneath this carefully crafted image, something sinister was brewing. For over 2 decades, 2 families have been locked in a blood feud that would make the Montags and Capulets look like a neighborhood disagreement. On one side, the Lyons clan. On the other, the Daniel family. Between them lies a trail of bodies, burned buildings, and broken lives that stretches back to the year 2001. But what could possibly spark a war that would rage for a quarter of a century? The answer lies in 20,000 pounds worth of white powder and a robbery that would unleash hell. The year was 2001. Cocaine was still relatively new to Scotland's criminal underworld. While heroin had long been the drug of choice in Glasgow's impoverished housing estates, this new substance promised far greater profits. The dealers had even given it a nickname, Morningside Speed, named after Edinburgh's most affluent suburb. In a Daniel gang safe house, 20,000 pounds worth of this precious commodity sat waiting. It should have been secure. It should have been untouchable. It wasn't. Someone from the Lyons gang had been watching, waiting, planning. And when the moment was right, they struck, making off with the entire stash. Now, £20,000 might not sound like much in today's drug trade, but in 2001, it was enough to start a war. A war that would consume 2 families, terrorize entire communities, and ultimately spread its tentacles across Europe. The Daniels wanted their drugs back. More importantly, they wanted blood. And blood is exactly what they would get. To understand this war, you need to understand the soldiers who would fight it. Eddie Lyons Sr. wasn't your typical community leader. By day, he ran what appeared to be legitimate community projects in Glasgow's Milton housing estate. He even convinced local councillors to let him use a former school building for his community work. What those naive politicians didn't realize was that they had just handed over a building to one of Glasgow's most dangerous crime bosses. The community centre would later be shut down after complaints that it had become a gang headquarters. But if Eddie Lyons Sr. was the politician of the family, his son Eddie Jr. would become its enforcer. And on the other side of this bloody equation stood a man whose very name struck fear into Glasgow's underworld. Kevin Gerbil Carroll. Carroll wasn't just a criminal. He was an artist of violence. His signature move became known throughout Glasgow as alien abductions. Rivals would simply disappear. Days later, they'd be found dumped on street corners, semi-naked, traumatized beyond repair, and claiming they couldn't remember what had happened to them. But Carroll's victims knew. They just weren't talking. Carroll had another motivation for his war against the Lyons family. According to sources close to the investigation, he claimed to have been bullied by members of the Lyons clan during his school days. Now, with the power of the Daniel gang behind him, it was time for payback. But Carroll would take this personal vendetta to a level that shocked even Glasgow's hardened criminal underworld. What he did next crossed a line that even gangsters considered sacred. In 1991, 8-year-old Gary Lyons died of leukemia. For his family, including his older brother Eddie Jr., it was an unimaginable tragedy. The kind of loss that transcends the brutal world of gang warfare. Gary's gravestone stood in a Glasgow cemetery as a memorial to an innocent child taken far too soon. A place where family members could come to mourn, to remember, to find some small measure of peace. Kevin Gerbil Carroll decided to destroy that peace. In an act that stunned even his fellow criminals, Carroll vandalized the child's gravestone. He desecrated the memory of an 8-year-old boy who had never hurt anyone, who had died of a disease he couldn't control, whose only crime was being born a Lyons. In the underworld, there are rules, unwritten codes that even the most hardened criminals respect. Family members who aren't in the life are off limits. Children are sacred. The dead should rest in peace. Carroll had broken every one of these rules. The response was swift and merciless. On February 11th, 2010, Kevin Gerbil Carroll walked into an Asda supermarket car park in Glasgow, probably thinking about nothing more than his weekly shopping. He would never walk out. As horrified shoppers watched, gunmen opened fire in broad daylight. Carroll fell to the pavement, his reign of terror finally over. The man who had terrorized Glasgow for years was dead, executed in full view of families doing their Saturday shopping. Carroll was so hated that police had nearly 100 potential suspects for his murder. In most cases, narrowing down that list would be the detective's primary challenge. In this case, the challenge was different. Which of Carroll's many enemies had finally gotten to him first? But rather than ending the feud, Carroll's death was about to make it infinitely worse. You might think that Carroll's death would have satisfied the Lyons family's thirst for vengeance. You might think that both sides would step back from the brink, that cooler heads would prevail. You would be wrong. For 6 years after Carroll's murder, an uneasy peace held. Both gangs continued their criminal enterprises, But the open warfare seemed to have ended. Glasgow's police allowed themselves to hope that maybe, just maybe, the city's most dangerous feud was finally over. Then, in 2016, everything changed. Jamie Daniel, the founding father of the Daniel Gang, died of cancer. Unlike most of his criminal contemporaries, Daniel had managed something remarkable. He died peacefully, in his bed, surrounded by family. But his peaceful death was about to unleash the most violent chapter in this saga yet. With Jamie Daniel gone, there was suddenly a power vacuum at the heart of one of Scotland's most dangerous criminal organizations. Territory was up for grabs. Drug routes needed new management. Most importantly, someone needed to decide who would lead the Daniel Gang into its next chapter. The Lyons family saw their opportunity. In just 5 months, they launched 5 separate murder attempts against Daniel Gang members. 5 calculated strikes designed to decapitate their enemies once and for all. But what happened to Stephen Bonzo Daniel would shock even Scotland's violence-hardened police force. It was a scene from a Hollywood action movie. Except the blood was real and the screams were genuine. Stephen Daniel's car roared through the streets of North Glasgow at over 100 miles per hour, with his would-be assassins in hot pursuit. The chase ended when Daniel's car finally crashed. But his ordeal was just beginning. The Lyons gang members dragged him from the wreckage and produced machetes. What they did next was so savage that when paramedics arrived, they initially thought Daniel had been shot. His face was slashed so badly that his nose was hanging by threads of skin near his ear. Blood pooled on the pavement as Daniel lay semi-conscious, his features almost unrecognizable. This wasn't just attempted murder. This was a message, a brutal demonstration of what happened to anyone who opposed the Lyons family. But the Daniels were far from finished. While Glasgow's gangs were macheting each other in car parks and housing estates, something far more dangerous was happening behind the scenes. These weren't just local thugs fighting over street corners anymore. The Lyons family had formed an alliance that would transform them from Scottish criminals into international players. Their new partners were Ireland's notorious Kinahan Cartel, an organization so dangerous that its leadership had fled to Dubai to escape Dublin's law enforcement. Suddenly, the stakes were much higher than £20,000 worth of stolen cocaine. The Kinahan Cartel controlled supply routes that stretched from South America through Europe. Their product was measured not in thousands, but in millions. And now, they had chosen the Lyons family as their Scottish distributors. One Lyons family member had already relocated to Dubai after an attempt on his life in Glasgow back in 2006. From his Middle Eastern base, he was reportedly building what insiders called a Celtic cartel, a partnership between Scottish and Irish criminals that could flood the UK with South American cocaine. This wasn't just about Glasgow anymore. This was about international drug trafficking on a scale that Scottish law enforcement had never seen before. But with greater profits came greater risks. And when you're swimming with international sharks, sometimes the biggest danger doesn't come from your oldest enemies. Sometimes it comes from your newest friends. By 2023, the war had evolved beyond recognition. This wasn't the same feud that had started over £20,000 of stolen drugs. The players were the same, but the game had changed completely. Homes were firebombed across central Scotland. Businesses, garages, taxi companies, beauty salons went up in flames. Suspected associates were attacked with machetes in broad daylight. Even well-heeled districts of Edinburgh weren't safe anymore. But perhaps most chilling of all, the gangsters started posting videos of their handiwork online. Masked thugs filmed themselves as they destroyed property, as they terrorized communities, as they turned Glasgow's carefully cultivated image as a city of culture into a global embarrassment. The violence was reaching far beyond the gangs themselves. Russell Findlay, now leader of the Scottish Conservatives, but formerly an investigative journalist, had written a book about the Daniel Lyons feud called Caught in the Crossfire. The title proved prophetic. In 2015, 3 years after his book's publication, Findlay answered his front door to find a man waiting for him. Before he could react, acid was thrown in his face, leaving him permanently scarred. I remember thinking at the time, Findlay would later say, "Why is nobody else saying enough is enough?" This is what happens when organized crime becomes too powerful. They try to take on mainstream society. The attack on Findlay wasn't an isolated incident. Across Scotland, the tentacles of gang violence were reaching into legitimate society. Councillors were being intimidated. Prison officers' cars were being firebombed. The gangs weren't content to fight each other anymore. They were taking on the state itself. Which brings us back to that Saturday night in Fuengirola, Spain. Back to Monahan's bar, with its happy hour specials and big screen TVs. Back to Ross Monahan and Eddie Lyons Jr., watching football and probably feeling safer than they had in years. They were wrong. Spain's Costa del Sol has long been known as the Costa del Crime, a sunny refuge for British criminals looking to escape the reach of UK law enforcement. For decades, fugitives have hidden in plain sight among the beach bars and golf courses, running their empires from poolside loungers. Ross Monahan, 43, had every reason to feel secure in his Spanish exile. He'd been acquitted of murdering Kevin Gerbil Carroll back in 2010, though the case had made him a marked man in Glasgow. After being shot in the shoulder in 2017, he'd made the sensible decision to relocate to sunnier climes. Eddie Lyons Jr., 46, was visiting his old friend. Both men were senior figures in the Lyons organization, but they were also getting older, possibly looking to step back from the violence that had defined their lives. On that Saturday night, their past finally caught up with them, as the Champions League final ended and customers began filing out of Monahan's bar. A car pulled up outside. Security cameras would later capture what happened next, but they wouldn't capture the identity of the killer. A figure emerged from the vehicle, dressed entirely in black. Some witnesses later described him as blonde-haired, possibly Scottish himself. He moved with purpose, with the confidence of someone who had done this before. 2 shots, 2 bodies, 2 lives ended on a Spanish sidewalk, their blood mixing with the warm Mediterranean evening air. The gunman climbed back into his vehicle and disappeared into the night, leaving behind a crime scene that would send shockwaves from the Costa del Sol all the way back to Glasgow. But here's where this story takes an even more sinister turn. Spanish police have yet to identify the Fuengirola gunman. Scottish authorities have plenty of suspects, but proving which one pulled the trigger will be nearly impossible. The killer is probably already back in Scotland, or perhaps hiding somewhere else in Europe's criminal underground. But Russell Findlay, the man who literally bears the scars of this conflict, raises a troubling possibility. What if the shooter wasn't working for the Daniel gang at all? It could have been the work of their long-standing enemies in Scotland, he says. But out in Spain, they are swimming with much bigger sharks who may be even more ruthless than they are. Think about it. The Lyons gang's partnership with the Kinahan Cartel has made them players in an international game where the stakes are measured in hundreds of millions of pounds. At that level, loyalty is temporary and business is everything. Maybe Monahan and Lyons Jr. knew too much. Maybe they were skimming profits. Maybe they were planning to cooperate with law enforcement. Or maybe they were simply expendable pieces in a much larger chess game. In the world of international drug trafficking, yesterday's partner can become tomorrow's target without warning. The truth is, we may never know who ordered their execution. The Spanish investigation continues, but professional hits like this are designed to leave no traces, no witnesses, no evidence that leads back to those who commissioned the killing. What we do know is that 2 more lives have been claimed by a feud that began with 20,000 pounds of stolen cocaine more than 2 decades ago. A local dispute that has now metastasized into something far more dangerous. As I speak to you now, this war is far from over. Reports emerged last month that the Lyons gang was seeking a truce with their Daniel rivals. Given the recent events in Fuengirola, that seems highly unlikely. Scottish police have arrested over 40 people in connection with the ongoing feud. Angela Constance, Scotland's Justice Secretary, insists that law-abiding citizens have nothing to fear, pointing to overall crime statistics that show recorded crime down 40% since 2006 to 2007. But critics argue that these statistics hide a more troubling reality. While petty crime may be decreasing, organized crime is becoming more sophisticated, more violent, and more international in scope. The gangs aren't just getting stronger, they're getting smarter. Russell Findlay warns that Scotland isn't a narco-state yet, but it's showing alarming signs of heading in that direction. Attacks on journalists, counselors, and prison officers. Intimidation of public officials. The systematic undermining of law and order. This is how these things start, he says. Too often, the response has been to justify and explain, not to punish and deter. The gangs must be rubbing their hands with glee. Meanwhile, in Spain, local authorities are scrambling to respond. Ana Mula, the mayor of Fuengirola, is calling for more resources to combat organized crime. We live in a world, and at a time where crime knows no borders, she says. In places like the Costa del Sol, we're seeing developments that inevitably affect us. We need much greater involvement from the state on this issue. But here's the terrifying reality. This isn't just Scotland's problem anymore. It's not even just Europe's problem. What started as a local feud in Glasgow has now become part of a global network of organized crime that spans continents. The Lyons-Daniel War has connected Scottish housing estates to Irish cartels, Dubai money laundering operations, and South American cocaine routes. This is how modern organized crime works. Local disputes become international incidents. Regional gangs become global players. And violence that starts on the streets of Glasgow ends with bodies falling in Spanish resort towns. The traditional boundaries that once contained criminal activity, national borders, police jurisdictions, even language barriers, have become meaningless. Today's criminals operate like multinational corporations, with supply chains that stretch across continents and management structures that would make legitimate businesses envious. And at the heart of it all, 2 Scottish families continue their quarter-century war, leaving a trail of bodies, burned buildings, and shattered lives in their wake. The question isn't whether there will be more violence. The question is where it will happen next, and who will be caught in the crossfire. Will it be another shooting in Spain? A firebombing in Glasgow? A machete attack in Edinburgh? Or will the war spread to new territories, new countries, new continents? The only certainty is this. As long as there are millions of pounds to be made from cocaine trafficking, and as long as 2 families refuse to forgive a 20-year-old theft, the killing will continue. Because in the world of organized crime, some debts are never forgotten, and some wars never end. The next time you hear about gang violence on the news, remember Ross Monahan and Eddie Lyons Jr. bleeding out on a Spanish sidewalk while tourists walked by. Remember that what might seem like distant criminal activity can reach across borders, across decades, across continents to claim new victims. Remember that behind every statistic about organized crime are real people whose lives have been destroyed by violence, intimidation, and fear. The war between the Lyons and Daniel families began with 20,000 pounds of stolen cocaine in 2001. 23 years later, it has claimed countless lives, terrorized entire communities, and transformed from a local dispute into an international crisis. And unless something changes dramatically in how we approach organized crime, not just in Scotland, but globally, this is just the beginning. The question isn't whether you'll hear about this war again. The question is, who will die next? If this story has shocked you, if you want to understand how organized crime continues to spread its tentacles across the globe, then make sure you subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell. We dive deep into the world's most dangerous criminal organizations, uncovering the truth behind the headlines and the human cost of the drug trade. Share this video with someone who needs to understand that gang violence isn't just a local problem anymore. It's a global crisis that affects us all. And let me know in the comments below. Do you think Scotland is doing enough to combat organized crime? Or are the gangs already winning this war? Your voice matters in this conversation. Until next time, stay safe, and remember, the truth is always more dangerous than fiction. From the crowded backstreets of Dublin to the glitzy villas of Marbella, one crime family rose from obscurity and rewrote the playbook of organized crime. Their name would echo far beyond Ireland, whispered in the same breath as Italy's Camorra, Mexico's Los Zetas, Japan's Yakuza, and Russia's feared thieves-in-law. This was no ordinary gang of street thugs. This was a cartel that grew into one of the most powerful and globally recognized crime empires of the 21st century. At the heart of it all stood Daniel Kinahan, a man with two faces. To some, he was a power broker in international boxing, shaking hands with champions under the bright lights of sold-out arenas. To others, he was the architect of a bloody underworld feud that left a trail of bodies scattered across Europe. Nearly 20 lives would be claimed in a storm of vengeance, greed, and betrayal. But to understand Daniel's rise, you have to start with his father, Christopher Kinahan, the man who built the foundations of an empire. In the 1990s, Dublin was changing. The city's youth were increasingly exposed to a flood of drugs. And into this market stepped Christopher. He wasn't just another dealer. He was organized, calculating, and ambitious. He began supplying drugs to Dublin's younger generation, quickly building a reputation as a figure not to be crossed. His early operations may have been local, but Christopher was already thinking bigger. By the early 2000s, however, the very ambition that fueled his rise also fractured his network. His gang splintered, and when gangs split in Dublin, blood usually followed. A violent feud erupted that left around a dozen men dead, a grim reminder of the stakes in this ruthless world. But Christopher was not a man easily shaken. In 2001, after a stint in prison, he emerged with renewed determination. Rather than simply return to the old ways, he reinvented himself. He began studying Spanish and Dutch, languages that would prove invaluable in the world of international drug trafficking. He understood that to survive, he needed to escape Dublin's endless cycle of feuds and step onto a larger stage. That stage was southern Spain. Marbella and the Costa del Sol were already havens for expatriates, tourists, and most importantly, smugglers who moved massive quantities of cocaine across Europe. For Christopher, relocating there wasn't just about avoiding old rivals. It was about positioning himself at the very center of Europe's wholesale drug market. In Dublin, he left the day-to-day operations in the capable and brutal hands of Freddie Thompson. Delegating power was risky, but it was also necessary. While Christopher built connections in Spain, Thompson ensured that the Kinahan influence in Ireland only grew stronger. The strategy worked. What began as a Dublin gang evolved into a European powerhouse. Christopher carefully expanded his network, transforming it into one of the continent's most efficient distributors of narcotics. Thompson's grip on the Irish streets gave the cartel a firm base, while Christopher's European connections unlocked unimaginable profits. But such growth always comes with enemies. In 2008, Christopher himself became a target and was forced to flee. Leadership in Dublin shifted to his cousin, Liam Byrne, whose group would eventually be branded by Irish authorities as the Byrne Organized Crime Group. The international spotlight was closing in. In 2010, Spanish authorities launched Operation Shovel, a sweeping investigation designed to dismantle the Kinahan Empire. Raids were carried out, arrests were made, and for a moment, it looked as if the Kinahans might finally fall. But the operation collapsed. Prosecutors couldn't assemble enough evidence to secure convictions, and whispers of corruption within the Spanish police further tainted the case. To the outside world, the Kinahans appeared untouchable. Even in the face of international law enforcement, their empire not only survived, it thrived. Their wealth was staggering, their reach global, and their investments spanned legitimate and shadow industries alike. It was during this time that Daniel Kinahan began to emerge as more than just the heir to his father's empire. The organization was generating over 1 billion euros, and Daniel was increasingly seen as the man shaping its future. Charismatic and sharp, he possessed the business instincts that allowed him to straddle two very different worlds: the ruthless violence of the underworld and the polished glamour of professional sports. In 2012, Daniel co-founded MGM Boxing in Marbella, a venture that would later be rebranded as MTK Global. On the surface, it was a legitimate enterprise, managing fighters and organizing events. But beneath the glossy exterior, many suspected it was also a clever way to launder money and cleanse Daniel's reputation. After all, what better disguise for a cartel leader than rubbing shoulders with world-class athletes and being photographed ringside at championship bouts? For Daniel, boxing was both a business and a shield. He didn't do it alone. His core circle remained loyal. Freddie Thompson continued to oversee criminal operations, while Gary Hutch, one of Daniel's most trusted lieutenants, played a vital role. For a time, it seemed the Kinahan machine was unstoppable. But empires rarely crumble from outside forces. More often, they rot from within, and that rot began with betrayal. The relationship between Daniel and Gary Hutch soured over money, as greed and mistrust drove a wedge between once loyal allies. Daniel believed Gary had crossed him, and in the world of organized crime, betrayal rarely goes unpunished. An attempted hit on Daniel left an innocent boxer shot, a chilling reminder of how blurred the lines between Daniel's two worlds had become. Gary fled, seeking protection from his uncle, Jerry the Monk Hutch, a legendary figure in Dublin's underworld. A deal was struck. For 200,000 euros, Daniel would spare Gary's life. But trust was a currency long depleted between them. The truce shattered when Gary Hutch was executed in Marbella in 2015. For the Hutch family, this was not just a murder. It was an unforgivable declaration of war. Soon after, an attempt was made on Jerry Hutch's life in Lanzarote, but he narrowly escaped. The message was clear. The feud had begun. What followed was one of the bloodiest chapters in modern Irish crime history. In February 2016, the fragile boundary between the criminal world and the public sphere collapsed in spectacular fashion. During a crowded boxing weigh-in at the Regency Hotel in Dublin, gunmen disguised as police stormed the venue. Their target was Daniel Kinahan. Shots rang out, chaos erupted, and though Daniel escaped unharmed, his associate David Byrne wasn't as fortunate. Byrne's death was the spark that ignited an all-out war between the Kinahans and the Hutches. The violence spiraled almost immediately. Retaliation came in brutal form when the Hutch clan's brother, a taxi driver uninvolved in crime, was murdered. It was a message of escalation. Nobody was safe. Dublin descended into fear as the feud claimed victim after victim. Around 18 lives would be lost in a relentless cycle of hits and counter-hits. Daniel Kinahan was alleged to have personally ordered at least 14 assassinations. The cartel began hiring foreign hitmen, professionals from outside Ireland, including the notorious Estonian contract killer, Imre Arakas. Each killing tightened the grip of fear, not only in Dublin but across Europe. For the authorities, The feud created an unprecedented challenge. Gardaí responded with increased armed patrols, checkpoints, and round-the-clock surveillance. Dublin became a city living under siege, its streets patrolled like a war zone. Yet even as police cracked down, the killings continued. The Kinahan-Hutch feud wasn't just about vengeance. It was about power, dominance, and survival. By the mid-2000s, the Kinahan name had transformed into something far larger than a Dublin crime family. It was a global brand of fear and influence, a criminal enterprise whose reach spanned continents and whose leadership was as comfortable at a weigh-in press conference as it was ordering a hit from the shadows. And with Daniel Kinahan at the helm, the lines between the legitimate and the illicit would blur like never before. As Dublin's streets drowned in blood and fear, the Kinahans made a calculated decision. The Irish capital was no longer a safe base. Every move was monitored, every phone tapped, every ally under suspicion. With police pressure mounting and the Hutch feud spiraling out of control, the cartel shifted its center of gravity thousands of miles away, to the glittering city of Dubai. Dubai was more than a paradise of glass towers and desert wealth. For Daniel Kinahan and his lieutenants, it was sanctuary. The United Arab Emirates had no extradition treaty with Ireland, which meant the long reach of European justice ended at the Gulf's edge. From luxury apartments and lavish hotels, the Kinahans directed operations with the same precision as before, but now insulated by distance and fortified by the wealth they had amassed. But if the move gave them safety, it also put them under the harshest international spotlight yet. Newspapers splashed Daniel's name across front pages, labeling him the Irish narco baron in Dubai. European governments pledged joint operations. And back in Ireland, the crackdown was relentless. 79 people tied to the feud were arrested. Dozens more faced charges. Liam Byrne, Daniel's cousin and key ally, fled to Birmingham, trying to rebuild what was left of his network. Authorities seized millions. Supercars, designer jewelry, luxury homes stuffed with cash. The cartel may have been alive in Dubai, but in Ireland, the walls were closing in. In that vacuum, new predators emerged. On the streets of Dublin, the Gucci Gang, led by the flamboyant figure known only as Mr. Flashy, began to rise. Supplied directly by the Kinahans, this young gang embraced a flashy lifestyle of expensive clothes, fast cars, and social media swagger. To many, they were the future face of organized crime in Ireland. A new generation raised under the shadow of the Kinahans. But as history had shown, ambition always comes with blood. Splits tore through the Gucci Gang, and the feud turned inward. In 2022, James Whalen, one of its members, was murdered, sparking a new cycle of violence. Mr. Flashy himself narrowly survived an assassination attempt and now lives in hiding, his empire as fragile as it is flashy. Across the Irish Sea, the Kinahans' ambitions were far greater. Britain was the real prize, and in the United Kingdom, one man became Daniel's most trusted lieutenant, Thomas Bomber Kavanagh. Since the early 2000s, Bomber had overseen the cartel's expansion in Britain. Brutal, efficient, and feared, he turned the UK into a €1 billion market for Kinahan drugs. Alongside him was James Mulvey, another heavyweight in the underworld. But trust was a rare commodity in this business. Gerard and Paul Kavanagh, once insiders, fell out over money. Both were executed in cold blood. Mulvey himself grew paranoid, convinced Bomber might betray him. The paranoia wasn't unfounded. In 2019, a raid on Bomber's home revealed weapons, ammunition, and evidence linking him to large-scale shipments of drugs. By 2021, he stood in court facing charges that would finally strip him of his power. The evidence was overwhelming. €36 million worth of drugs proven, and investigators estimated the true total of his shipments at nearly €700 million. Bomber, once untouchable, was sentenced to a long prison term, a devastating blow to the cartel's UK command. But the Kinahans had spread their roots deep. In Liverpool, they had found another set of allies. Liam Cornett and Michael Rice became their representatives in the port city, running an operation that mirrored the County Lines model. They flooded England with cocaine and heroin, stretching their influence across smaller towns and exploiting vulnerable youths to move product. The empire looked solid until one careless mistake shattered the illusion. A grenade exploded inside a house stocked with 1.6 million euros worth of drugs, drawing police attention. The operation unraveled. By 2019, both Cornett and Rice were behind bars, their network dismantled. What had begun as a Dublin gang was now a global cartel. But such reach could not escape the notice of the world's most powerful governments. The United States Department of Justice officially entered the war against the Kinahans. A $5 million bounty was placed on the heads of Daniel, his father Christopher, and his brother Christy Jr. Their assets across the globe were frozen, from bank accounts in Europe to properties in the United Arab Emirates. Investigators uncovered more than 200 front companies, trading in everything from textiles to food, used to launder billions. The Kinahans' empire of shadow money was being dismantled piece by piece. Even their jewel, MTK Global, could not survive. Daniel had long denied having control over the boxing company, but the evidence told a different story. The pressure became unbearable. Sponsors pulled out, partners severed ties, and by 2022, MTK Global collapsed. What had once been Daniel's cleverest disguise now became the evidence that condemned him in the eyes of the world. For boxing, the scandal was seismic. Daniel Kinahan had been advisor to Tyson Fury, one of the sport's greatest heavyweights. He had even brokered the deal for Fury to face Anthony Joshua in what was billed as the fight of the century. But behind the press conferences and the million-dollar contracts was a cartel boss wanted by international law enforcement. As sanctions piled up, the sport recoiled in shame. Promoters and fighters scrambled to distance themselves, but the damage was done. The ties between organized crime and boxing had been exposed, and the fallout still lingers. Yet despite everything, raids, arrests, sanctions, the cartel refused to crumble. From Dubai, Daniel continued to pull strings. Authorities believe the Kinahans now operate with three clear priorities. Protect Daniel at all costs, secure their wealth hidden in offshore networks, and keep the drug trade alive. But whispers began to circulate of an informant within their inner circle. Christopher Kinahan Sr. himself was said to be investigating the betrayal. If true, it would mean the cartel faces not only pressure from outside forces, but also the rot of suspicion within. Meanwhile, in Dublin, the fear of violence never truly left. Authorities worry that as the cartel regroups, the bloodshed could return. Rival gangs, sensing weakness, are already circling. Among them, the Grundon brothers, leaders of a group known simply as the Family, are rising fast. Their dominance in Ireland grows each month, and some Garda officers now believe they could surpass the Kinahans locally. The cartel, unwilling to surrender its throne, has already dispatched senior emissaries from Dubai to reassert control. The Underworld is bracing for yet another storm. The story of the Kinahan Cartel is far from over. From Dublin to Dubai, London to Las Vegas, their shadow stretches across continents. They are hunted by the most powerful law enforcement agencies in the world, yet still command fear and respect in the criminal underworld. Will Daniel Kinahan end his days behind bars, or will he continue to outmaneuver justice, hiding behind the wealth and connections he has so carefully built? And with rivals closing in and whispers of betrayal growing louder, could the cartel one day collapse from within? What began as a local gang in Dublin has become a case study in how modern organized crime operates. Global, corporate, and almost impossible to eradicate. But history shows that even the most powerful crime empires eventually fall. The question is not if, but when. And as the Kinahan's empire trembles under the weight of global pursuit, one thing remains certain. The world is watching. If you found this story gripping and want to uncover more about the hidden empires of organized crime, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Inside the Secret World of Mafia Titans, and join us as we continue to explore the dark corners of power, greed, and betrayal.
Liverpool, 2007. Rain hammering down like gods trying to wash something away. Blue lights carving through the dark outside a gym and speak. And there, on the wet pavement, a body bag being zipped shut. Colin Smith, businessman, father, ghost. He'd spent years outmaneuvering cartels that turned men into warning signs. He'd smiled at police officers who suspected nothing. But when you lie to everyone long enough, someone eventually stops believing. And in this world, they don't ask for receipts. They collect. Who was this man? The neighbor who drove a modest car and picked his kids up from school? And why did it take 6 years after his partner's murder for the bill to come due? Let me tell you about Liverpool in the 1980s, because that's where this starts. Not in boardrooms or mansions, in the ruins. The docks collapsed, 40% unemployment. Families that built ships for generations suddenly had nothing to build at all. And when legitimate work dies, illegitimate work thrives. Heroin flooded in like a plague. They called it Smack City. Some wore that badge with pride. Others just wore it. This wasn't glamorous. This was survival wearing a tracksuit. Then came Curtis Warren, the blueprint, the original ghost. He didn't just sell drugs in Liverpool, he globalized it. Amsterdam connections, Colombian pipelines. Warren showed everyone how small-time dealers could become international operators. He was the first to prove you didn't need to be Italian or Colombian to run a cartel. You just needed to be smarter than everyone hunting you. Until 1996, when they finally caught him, locked him away, left a vacuum the size of the Mersey Tunnel. And Colin Smith? He was watching, quietly. You wouldn't have noticed Colin Smith at a party. Average height, soft-spoken, worked at small car part shops in Huyton, doing bookkeeping. The kind of man who remembers your birthday, but forgets his own. Neighbors loved him. Police never looked twice. That was the point. Because while Curtis Warren built an empire with flash and reputation, Colin understood something deeper. True power doesn't announce itself. It whispers. Mid-1990s, Colin steps into Warren's shadow. No gold chains, no nightclub appearances, no Instagram before Instagram existed. Just efficiency. Numbers that balanced perfectly, shipments that never got caught. A fruit import company that looked so legitimate it was boring. And boring is invisible. He'd receive containers marked tropical produce from South America. Inside, cocaine. Hundreds of kilos, hidden in false bottoms beneath actual mangoes and bananas. The invoices were real, the paperwork pristine. Even customs agents would wave it through because who audits fruit that aggressively? Genius, really. In a world where everyone's trying to look like a gangster, Colin looked like he sold groceries. Here's where it gets strange. Colin held family Sundays. Every associate had to bring their wives and kids. Barbecues, football matches, birthday parties for children who had no idea their fathers were moving millions. The police thought it was sweet. Community man, family values. It was theater, criminal meetings disguised as suburban wholesomeness. Because who raids a children's birthday party?
While others posed for photos with stacks of cash, Colin built a ghost network. One so clean, investigators thought it was just a logistics firm. They had files on him. Thin ones. Businessman. Import-export. Clean tax records. Nothing stuck because there was nothing visible to grab. But every empire built on silence eventually echoes. And Colin's echo came wearing a suit and an enforcer's smile. His name was Stephen Lawler. Stephen Lawler wasn't invisible. He didn't want to be. Ex-bouncer turned fixer. Ran nightclub security rackets across Liverpool. If you owned a club, you paid Lawler's crew, or you found yourself closing early due to unforeseen incidents. Broken glass, broken bones, the kind of persuasion that doesn't require PowerPoint presentations. But Lawler was more than muscle. He was Colin's bridge, the enforcer in a designer suit, the man who could sit with Colombian intermediaries and make them believe Liverpool was serious, professional, worth the risk. Police surveillance from 1999 to 2001 tied him to 12 assaults. 12 they could prove. The real number? Let's just say Stephen Lawler was very good at his job. Colin trusted him. Or maybe Colin needed him. In this world, the line between those two things gets blurry fast. Colin had rules, obsessive ones. All deals were handshake only. No written ledgers, no phone records, no paper trails. Paper trails kill, he'd say. And he was right. Paper trails put Curtis Warren away. Colin learned that lesson well. But here's the problem with burning all the receipts. When money goes missing, no one knows who took it. And when no one knows who took it, everyone suspects everyone. Paranoia becomes currency. He thought no record meant no evidence. It also meant no friends when the money went missing. And in 2001, a lot of money went missing. 72 million pounds. Let that number sit. 500 kilograms of pure cocaine, shipped on credit from Colombia through Amsterdam. The kind of deal that makes careers, or ends lives. Usually both. Lawler brokered it, used his connections. The Colombians trusted him because Colin stood behind him. The arrangement was simple. Deliver the product, collect the money, everyone profits. Liverpool to Cartagena, handshake across an ocean. Then the shipment vanished. Not seized, not intercepted, vanished. Someone took it. Someone sold it. Someone kept the money. The Colombians wanted answers. Colin wanted answers. Lawler had none to give. Or maybe he had answers he chose not to share. Trust evaporates fast when tens of millions disappear. May 2001. Stephen Lawler walks out of a Liverpool nightclub. Late. Alone. Probably felt safe. He'd walked out of 100 clubs the same way. But this time, a rival security firm led by Peter Clark was waiting. 4 men. One with a shotgun. They didn't ask questions. They didn't negotiate. Stephen Lawler died in the street outside the very kind of club he used to control. One bullet erased Colin's only bridge to the cartel and left a 72 million pound question no one wanted to answer. Here's what the police didn't know yet. What Colin didn't know yet. The FBI and Interpol were already circling. A DEA memo from 2001, since declassified, noted Liverpool cell linked to Cartagena intermediaries under active surveillance by Europol. Colin's ghost network wasn't as invisible as he thought. The feds were watching. Not closely enough to arrest, but closely enough to track. International agencies marking dominoes, waiting to see which falls first. Colin was now exposed on 3 fronts. The cartel wanted their money, the police were one step behind, and Liverpool's underworld smelled blood. His own kind, the ones who used to fear Lawler. They weren't scared anymore. He'd built everything on silence and trust. Now he had neither. Just a target on his back that grew heavier every day. For 6 years, Colin tried to disappear deeper into legitimacy. Took his kids to school, went to the gym, lived the life of a man who never touched cocaine. Maybe he thought time would erase the debt, that the cartel would forget, that Liverpool would move on. But debt doesn't forget. It compounds. And someone, somewhere, was still keeping score. February 13, 2007. Colin walks out of his gym and speak. Same routine he'd followed for months. Tracksuit, Gym bag, car keys in hand, probably thinking about dinner, maybe thinking about his kids. He never made it to the car. Two men, motorcycle, probably wearing helmets, probably calm. They fired twice and left him bleeding out next to a row of parked cars. Colin Smith didn't scream, didn't run, didn't fight, just collapsed, like a man who'd been expecting this moment for 6 years. The gym cameras caught nothing useful. The street had no witnesses. Or rather, it had plenty. They just didn't see a thing. That's how it works in Liverpool when the message is meant for everyone. But let's rewind, because the question isn't how he died, it's why he waited 6 years to die. After Lawler's murder in 2001, Colin had a choice. Come clean to the Colombians, explain the shipment was stolen by rivals, take the loss, rebuild trust slowly, like a man who values tomorrow more than today. He chose a different path, the greedy one, the fatal one. Colin retrieved the cocaine himself, 500 kilos, sitting in Amsterdam warehouse under police noses. He moved it quietly, sold it across Europe in smaller chunks, Berlin, Prague, Barcelona, markets where Liverpool connections meant nothing and questions were minimal. He kept every penny. 72 million pounds. Gone. Into his pockets, into offshore accounts, into the kind of life he thought he'd earned. Here's the thing about stealing from cartels. They don't care about your reasoning, they care about the precedent. Let one man steal and walk away, and suddenly everyone thinks they can. Colin knew this. He did it anyway. Arrogance, desperation, maybe he thought distance and silence would save him. They never do. To cover his tracks, Colin paid the mules through offshore transfers, Gibraltar accounts mostly, labeled the payments fruit brokerage fees. Clean paperwork, legitimate-looking transactions, the kind of detail that makes forensic accountants nod approvingly before they realize what they're actually looking at. But the cartels weren't accountants. They were businessmen who understood one currency, trust. And Colin needed to buy time before they started asking harder questions. So he forged a Dutch customs seizure form, sent it to Cartagena with an apologetic note. The authorities grabbed it, nothing we could do, bad luck, let's regroup. Brilliant. Almost. Except the date stamps didn't match. Different fonts, different formats, the kind of mistakes experts spot in seconds. And cartels employ experts. They have to. Their survival depends on knowing who's lying. Stephen French, they called him the Blonde, was one of Colin's inner circle. Manchester boy, sharp dresser, sharper instincts. And in 2002, facing his own legal troubles, French made a calculation. Loyalty to Colin or loyalty to breathing? He flipped, told the cartel everything. The fake seizure, the secret sales, the offshore accounts. Europol intercepted communications confirming the whole sordid betrayal. Colin Smith hadn't lost the shipment, he'd stolen it, sold it, kept the money. The cartel's verdict was immediate. Debt equals death. 1 million pounds authorized for whoever delivered Colin's corpse. You don't negotiate bounties like that. You don't plead your case. You run or you die. Colin tried running without leaving. Strange strategy, but he couldn't abandon Liverpool entirely. His kids were there, his life, his identity. So he ran in place. New phones every week. Burners were placed like cigarettes. Drove mirrored routes home. Different streets, different times, never predictable. Installed bulletproof doors at his house. Not metaphorical ones, actual Kevlar-reinforced steel. His wife noticed, asked questions. He smiled and said business was stressful, which wasn't a lie, just an understatement. He wasn't running from police anymore. He was hiding from ghosts with accents he couldn't see coming. Paranoia becomes its own prison. Every car behind you is a threat. Every stranger at the gym might be the one. You stop sleeping properly, stop trusting anyone, stop living, really. You just survive, badly. Colin tried to launder more than money. He tried to launder his conscience, bought Spanish villas, legitimate property, invested in Merseyside car washes, cash businesses that cleaned dirty money while scrubbing vehicles. The irony probably escaped him. Maybe he thought wealth would insulate him, that if he looked successful enough, legitimate enough, the past would stay buried. But the past doesn't negotiate, it waits, and then it collects. For 6 years, Colin lived like a man walking on ice that cracked louder every day. He dropped his son at football practice, attended parent evenings, went to the gym religiously. Routine as camouflage, normalcy as armor. November 13th, 2007. Tuesday. Ordinary. Colin drops his boy off, watches him run onto the field, probably felt something close to peace. A few minutes where he wasn't calculating angles or checking mirrors. Then, his phone buzzed. Text message. Urgent business. Meet outside the gym, 20 minutes. He should have ignored it, should have known better. But when you've spent years pretending to be legitimate, sometimes you forget you're not. Or maybe he was just tired. Tired of running, tired of looking over his shoulder, tired of being the man who stole $72 million and got away with it. Except he hadn't gotten away with it. He just delayed the bill. Colin walked out of that gym in his tracksuit, gym bag over his shoulder, car keys in hand. Thinking about dinner, maybe, or his son's football match, or absolutely nothing, because his brain was finally briefly quiet. 2 shotgun blasts shattered that quiet, point-blank range. They hit him in the chest and head. He was dead before the sound finished echoing. The shooters disappeared in 90 seconds. Motorcycle engine, gone, like smoke. For 6 years, he lived as if every sound behind him was the one. And when it finally came, he didn't even turn. No one screamed. No one chased them. The gym parking lot emptied like water draining. People who saw everything suddenly remembered they saw nothing. That's the code. That's survival. Police arrived to find Colin Smith bleeding into the rain. Another body, another unsolved murder in a city with too many. They launched Operation Nike. 40 officers, 200 witness statements, months of investigation, years of dead ends. No convictions, not one. Because everyone who knew anything valued their own life more than justice. And, honestly, who can blame them? Here's a detail that haunts me. Colin had a £5 million life insurance policy, the kind you buy when you're pretending everything's fine. His family filed the claim after his death, needed it desperately. Man of the house gone, no income, kids to raise. The insurance company froze the payout, invoked the criminal conduct clause, said Colin's lifestyle and death were connected to illegal activity. The family fought it in court until 2015, 8 years. Lawyers and stress and debt piling up, while they argued over money Colin had stolen from people who'd already taken everything.
They never got the full amount, settled for scraps. Another debt Colin left unpaid. His kids grew up knowing their father was murdered. They also grew up knowing he wasn't who he said he was. That's a special kind of grief, mourning someone while learning they were a lie. The Underworld's reaction to Colin's death? Silence. Complete, total, calculated silence. No one avenged him. No one spoke his name in anger. No one even pretended to care. That silence was the message, louder than any threat. Cheat the cartels, and this is your legacy. A parking lot, a body bag, a family fighting over frozen insurance claims, and a city that forgets you ever existed. Colin Smith thought he was smarter than everyone. Smarter than Curtis Warren, smarter than the Colombians, smarter than the enforcers and rivals and police. And for a while, he was right. He built an empire on invisibility and died because he believed invisibility was the same as invincibility. It's not. Intelligence without loyalty isn't power, it's just suicide with a longer fuse. Colin proved that. He outsmarted both sides and lost to both. The cartels got their message delivered. The police got another cold case. And Colin, he got exactly what he earned. Not respect, not freedom, just a wet pavement and a zipped body bag. You want to know the status part? He could have walked away.
After Warren's arrest, he could have stayed invisible forever, kept his legitimate front, raised his kids quietly, lived small and safe. But greed doesn't whisper, it screams, and once you listen, you can't unhear it. 72 million pounds bought him 6 years of paranoia and a bullet he saw coming for 2,000 days. That's the exchange rate for betrayal. That's the price of playing ghosts. Liverpool moved on. The docks stayed broken. The drugs kept flowing. New names replaced old ones. Curtis Warren eventually got out of prison. The world kept spinning like Colin Smith never existed. Because in the end, he didn't matter. None of them do. They're just names on police files and whispers in pubs and cautionary tales for the next man stupid enough to think he's different. Colin thought he'd beaten death. He didn't. He just scheduled the appointment and showed up 6 years late. The rain still falls in Speak. The gym's still there. The parking space where he died probably holds someone's car right now. Someone who has no idea. Someone who thinks they're safe. Maybe they are. Or maybe they're just waiting for their own text message. Their own 90 seconds. Their own debt to come due. Because in this world, everyone pays eventually. The only question is when.
He smelled of diesel and cheap coffee, the same faint, honest odor you notice on commuters at 7 in the morning, the smell of work. Jesus Ruiz Hanau wiped his hands on his trousers, climbed into the driver's seat, and with a practiced pull of the lever, eased his bus into the river of the city. To the regulars who nodded as they climbed aboard, he was punctual, polite, the sort of man you'd trust with your child's school run and your elderly neighbor's shopping. He took tickets, made small talk about the weather, and at exactly 9:12 a.m., he touched the steering wheel as if blessing it. But in the seam between that ordinary gesture and the next, an empire moved through the veins of global commerce, a network worth, authorities would later estimate, in the region of £1 billion. How a man who smelled of diesel came to pull the strings behind such wealth is the secret this story begins to pry open. He was born in Colombia, where cocaine is not just a crop, but a centuries-old current running beneath communities and economies. The child of that landscape learned early the logic of supply and the language of discretion. As a young man, he emigrated to the United Kingdom and, like many before him, started again. Low profile, disciplined, almost invisible. He married, set up a modest home in a quiet London suburb, and joined the ranks of people the city can least afford to lose, the bus drivers who stitch neighborhoods together. Integration for him was a strategy as much as necessity. Being seen and blending into the daily rhythm was protection. Yet by night, when streets emptied and shutters came down, that same invisibility became cover for something far more elaborate. What looked like one life was two. By day, he handled schedules and passengers. By night, he handled paper, ports, and people. One identity navigated roundabouts and traffic lights. The other navigated shipping manifests and offshore companies. It is a strange and modern kind of double life. The public man who collects fares and small thanks, and the private man who, through a lattice of intermediaries and legitimate business fronts, constructed a pipeline for cocaine stretching from the production zones of Colombia to the warehouses in Britain's Midlands. The mechanics were not Hollywood spectacle, but banal, bureaucratic art. Custom seals, factory-pressed lids, invoices that looked untouchable. It was the art of making criminality look like commerce. His entry into the market was less thunderous than methodical. He leveraged roots and family ties in Colombia to secure supply at the source, but he did not move product like a kingpin standing center stage. He positioned himself as a trusted middleman, the discreet European operator cartels needed. In the late 2000s, the demand in Britain for high-purity cocaine swelled, and his timing was precise. Small shipments became regular, and regular shipments became patterns. The first successful consignments were hidden not in hollowed-out cars or secret compartments, but inside the things importers actually expect: sealed cans of tropical juice, crates of fruit, tinned produce meant for supermarket shelves. The drugs rode in plain sight under the authority of brand names and factory seals. To intercept them, you would have had to suspect the soup of global trade itself. Recruitment for Jesus was an exercise in camouflage. He hired ordinary people, men and women whose CVs read like any employer's ideal, Truck drivers, dock workers, warehouse staff. They were given small, deniable tasks. Sign here, move that container over there, don't ask questions when a pallet looked different. Each task alone meant nothing. In aggregate, they built a logistical organism that absorbed risk and redistributed culpability. The network was deliberately decentralized. It meant he never touched the product directly, never set foot in the warehouses where kilos were repackaged, never received cash in bulk. Instead, orders flowed down layers of intermediaries, coded instructions and innocuous phone calls, voices that passed messages like whispers through a gallery. The result was a structure designed to fail safe if one node was compromised, an economy of culpable ignorance. The smuggling methods were a study in meticulous deception. Cocaine was concealed inside legitimate food shipments, pressed into custom-lined containers that mimicked genuine fruit beverage packaging. Crates of produce arrived under authentic labels. Tinned goods bore the same stamps and production dates as any legal consignment. Those containers were not made in a garage, they were manufactured to factory standards, complete with plausible lot numbers and branding. The goods moved through major United Kingdom ports where the sheer volume of cargo provided cover. London Gateway, Portsmouth, Felixstowe, places where a single berth could unload thousands of containers without raising eyebrows. Crucially, these shipments came with documentation that passed casual scrutiny, invoices, manifests, and shipping records that read exactly like the paperwork of legitimate importers. To the casual observer, the paperwork would have been proof of innocence. Behind it lay shell companies, registered import-export firms that existed on paper but hid the flow of real value. Fake invoices and falsified manifests knitted together the illusion of legitimacy. Customs processes were tricked not by force, but by bureaucratic realism. Documents so clean and consistent, they suggested nothing amiss. Authorities, stretched thin and dealing with a flood of legitimate trade, could not examine every tin or every pallet. The system's seams were exploited by precision, not by chaos. But Jesus' life had two more dimensions: his public persona and the measures he took to protect the private one. On the surface, he remained the bus driver, the friendly man who knew the names of the regulars, who kept a modest home and never displayed ostentation. There were houses, yes, but nothing that screamed the wealth his network generated. The riches were buried in a phalanx of legal paper. Assets held through shell companies, properties registered in relatives' names, and corporate structures stretching into Colombia. Clothes hung in wardrobes that suggested taste without flash. Vehicles were registered under associates. The luxury was discreet, international, travel to expensive cities, high-end garments bought in cash, private indulgences that left little trace in the neighborhood where he caught his bus each morning. The press, when it later sniffed at his trail, would label him the budget Pablo Escobar. Powerful, yes, but understated, a nickname that captured the dissonance between public economy and private empire. As the years moved into the mid-2010s, the operation scaled. What began as small, careful shipments intensified into industrial-level trafficking. Routes multiplied, and the geography of his trade broadened. Colombia supplied, but transit hubs in Spain, the Netherlands and Belgium became vital way stations, places where cargo could be restructured, repackaged, or rerouted. From those ports, containers sailed to United Kingdom distribution points. The Midlands and London emerged as the terminal markets where the product was broken down. Secret warehouses in the industrial folds of towns became the places of transformation. Kilos turned into smaller denominations, wrapped for street-level sale, passed down to mid-level gangs who would, in turn, handle the messy business of distribution. Jesus kept himself operationally distant. He communicated through layers, trusted couriers, encrypted messages, a chorus of intermediaries who buffered him from both product and street violence. Scale is a hard thing to imagine in the abstract, but it can be measured in the way a warehouse hums at night. Pallets stacked to the ceiling, forklifts moving silently between aisles, packages stamped and boxed for onward travel. Hundreds of kilos per shipment became commonplace. Yet each container looked like any other consignment of canned goods or frozen fruit. When you hear over 1 billion pounds, it can sound like hyperbole until you picture month after month of that steady movement. The repetition of the same paperwork, the same seals, the same shipping lines. Money flowed back through the system in whispers, payments disguised as legitimate trade, transfers through accounts that seemed to belong to honest companies. The empire's valuation was not a single mountain of cash, but a spiderweb of capital, assets, and control. Even with such discipline, the friction of real life inserted itself. Family obligations, maintenance of the public routine, and the constant need to manage human unpredictability. A worker who asks too many questions, a shipment delayed by weather, a small clerical error, created pressure that could not be rehearsed away. For every perfectly sealed container, there was a moment of risk when something could go wrong. And risk, by its nature, invites attention. So the question became not only how he built this empire, but at what point the invisible threads might show. When a network is built to be deniable and diffuse, its weakness is often a single point of human failure. A missed call, a disgruntled dock worker, a customs official who chooses to look a little closer. By the middle of the decade, as the operation expanded beyond the delicate choreography of early years, the weight of that scale began to press on the edges. A shipment rerouted to a different terminal, an invoice that didn't quite match the manifest. The world of bus timetables and coffee breaks would have no idea that the very thing that made Jesus invisible could, in the end, be the thing that exposed him. And that, exactly, is where this first half of the story turns. From the steady construction of a hidden economy to the moment when small human frictions start to open a seam. What looked like bureaucratic perfection was beginning to show hairline cracks. What happened next would not be inevitable, but it would change everything. The bus driver who had moved through the city like a ghost would be forced to reckon with the consequences of a life engineered to be unseen. The first cracks came quietly, almost imperceptible at first, like hairline fractures in glass. On paper, the man's world was seamless. A bus driver's wages, a modest suburban life, no extravagance that screamed of criminal fortune. Yet beneath the spreadsheets and smiling pleasantries, something began to falter. Financial red flags surfaced in places where numbers never lie. Small businesses in his orbit showed unusual cash flows, profits that didn't match their size or customer base. Luxury purchases appeared under the radar. Clothing far too expensive for a man living off bus driver wages, trips abroad that strained the limits of plausibility. In the underworld, whispers began to spread. Rumors of hidden wealth, of a man who moved like a ghost, yet seemed to live far better than his role suggested. These were whispers too dangerous to ignore because in criminal circles, gossip can become surveillance, and suspicion is as lethal as a bullet. Paranoia crept into his routines. He switched phones as often as some change shirts. He varied his commutes, altered his habits, and reduced direct contact with those who once carried his orders. Still, the public remained blind. Neighbors waved across hedges. Passengers still thanked him as he punched their tickets. To them, he was unchanged. Just a bus driver. The illusion remained intact, but the foundation beneath it was beginning to shift. Law enforcement, however, had already begun to notice. Rising cocaine seizures at United Kingdom ports painted a troubling picture. Customs officials found bricks of powder tucked inside crates of fruit, juice cartons heavier than they should be. And there was a pattern. Food-based concealment, shipments too consistent in origin to be coincidence. The National Crime Agency and Border Force joined forces, determined to trace the flow back to its architect. Their tactics unfolded like a chess match. Surveillance teams shadowed him, watching the man who slipped between the roles of commuter and conspirator. Investigators scrutinized shipping manifests, invoices, the paper trail of front companies that appeared as legitimate importers. They monitored encrypted communications, intercepting messages where fruit and juice served as code for cocaine. Piece by piece, a mosaic of evidence formed. The breakthrough came with a single shipment of fruit beverage intercepted at a United Kingdom port. Inside were cans, sealed to perfection, indistinguishable from legitimate goods. Yet concealed within them was a payload of cocaine, enough to confirm suspicions beyond doubt. Forensic analysis traced the cargo back to businesses tied directly to him. The mask of invisibility had finally slipped, if only slightly, but it was enough. By early 2021, the investigation reached its climax. The takedown was not a single strike, but a coordinated offensive, executed with military precision. Raids swept across London and the Midlands. Warehouses long used as quiet nodes of repackaging were stormed. Safe houses where encrypted devices glowed in the dark were breached. And finally, the modest suburban home, the stage where his public identity had been so carefully curated, became the last target. Officers poured inside, seizing evidence, hundreds of kilos of cocaine stacked in packages, financial records detailing transfers through offshore havens, shipping manifests exposing the fraud of his front companies. Devices filled with encrypted instructions were bagged and tagged, each one another nail in the coffin. When they finally placed him in cuffs, he did not resist. Calm, composed, his expression betrayed nothing. To the officers who led him away, it was as if he was still in character, still the ordinary man, still the bus driver who never stood out. But the empire he had built, quiet, calculated, billion-pound in scale, had finally collapsed around him. The trial that followed drew fascination for its sheer scale. Prosecutors laid out the mechanics of his operation with clinical detail. They presented the disguised beverage containers, their false linings pried open to reveal the white powder inside. They traced the flow of money through offshore accounts, shell companies, and bank transfers designed to wash billions into clean streams. Forensic experts matched samples from seized cocaine to earlier shipments, proving continuity in supply. Every piece of evidence painted the picture of a man who was not merely involved, but who orchestrated the machinery of one of the largest drug pipelines in modern British history. The defense countered with a narrative of minimization. They argued he was not the mastermind, merely a minor player swept along in currents larger than himself. But the evidence was insurmountable. The jury did not hesitate. Guilty on counts of large-scale drug importation and running a major trafficking enterprise. The sentence that followed was decades in prison, a custodial term that ensured he would spend much of his life behind bars. The judge's words echoed through the courtroom, describing the operation as staggering in scale and sophistication. And with that, the facade of the bus driver finally shattered. The aftermath was immediate and brutal. Without its architect, the network crumbled. Warehouses were seized and sealed. Assets were frozen, bank accounts drained of their hidden millions. Associates were rounded up, some captured, others fleeing into the shadows of Europe's underworld. For a time, the cocaine market in the United Kingdom felt the impact. Supply chains faltered, shipments dried up, and gangs fought viciously over what little remained. The vacuum left by his collapse triggered turf wars, brutal street-level conflicts that spilled into headlines. For law enforcement, the case was hailed as a landmark victory. The National Crime Agency celebrated the operation as proof of their ability to dismantle even the most discreet, sophisticated trafficking networks. Border Force officials pointed to the seizures as evidence of vigilance at ports stretched thin by international trade. And beyond Britain, agencies in Colombia, Spain, and the Netherlands stood beside them, proof that international cooperation had been the key to bringing down a billion-pound enterprise. Yet amid the applause, there was caution. Experts warned that cocaine markets are resilient. Supply routes shift, networks adapt, and the demand that fuels the trade never diminishes. For every empire dismantled, another waits to rise. In universities and criminology courses, his case became a study, a lesson in the dangers of underestimation, in the reality that modern organized crime no longer wears obvious costumes. Students dissected how a man could live as a bus driver by day and as a global trafficker by night. Sociologists pointed to his story as a cultural warning. The criminal mastermind may not look like the scarred gangster of cinema. He may live next door, mow his lawn on Sundays, and drive your children to school. The ordinariness is the camouflage. The invisibility is the power. And so, his legacy is not simply of a collapsed empire, but of a parable for a society that often fails to see what hides in plain sight. He proved that the most dangerous criminals are not always the ones who flaunt wealth or violence. Sometimes they are the ones who blend seamlessly into the crowd, whose anonymity becomes their shield, whose routine becomes their weapon. The story lingers as both triumph and warning. Triumph for the agencies who brought him down, warning for the world that the cocaine trade is not extinguished by a single conviction. The machinery of global crime remains, adaptable and relentless. His empire is gone, but the demand that built it still fuels others. And as his cell door closes each night, the streets outside continue to pulse with the same trade he once controlled. The bus driver who built a billion-pound empire is now reduced to an inmate number. But the lesson of his rise and fall remains. The most dangerous faces are often the most familiar. They're the ones you never notice until it's too late. If you've been gripped by this story and want to journey deeper into the hidden machinery of organized crime, make sure you subscribe to Inside the Secret World of Mafia Titans. There are countless more stories like this one, lives of deception, empires of shadows and truths hiding behind ordinary masks. Don't miss what comes next.